His name is Lord Timothy Dexter. Recently, I happened upon a YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin because I was kind of bored and looking for some weird, interesting stories to spark the old noggin. Mr. Ballin has a ton of interesting, cool stories about missing people, crazy military stories, mysterious paranormal activity, and other things like that. But one story caught my attention, and boy did it bring me down a rabbit hole. The video is about a man named Timothy Dexter, who lived in Newburyport, Massachusetts, from 1747 to 1806. Mr. Ballin calls the video The Stray Cat King, and it is inspired from a video called Timothy Dexter, The Dumbest Rags to Riches Story, by the YouTube channel Sam O'Nella Academy. Both videos are hilarious, and I recommend checking both of them out. Both videos had me laughing out loud as I watched them. But on a hunch, I decided to check out. Timothy Dexter wrote an anthology where he writes as if he's a second grader trying to sound out the words. I did this because if I know modern mainstream media, history, science, culture, and religion, then what the mainstream calls dumb, illiterate ramblings is likely absolute gold information. His anthology is called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones. It contains no punctuation whatsoever, random capitalization of words, and all the words are spelled as if a second grader was trying to sound out how to spell the words. You can see some of the examples on the screen. After some publishers complained about his lack of punctuation, he added the following to his second edition. Further, Mr. Printer, the knowing ones complain of my book. The first edition had no stops. I put in enough here, and they may pepper and salt it as they please. Pepper him in where you want. The guy was a character. But I think I found a passable translation of the anthology, although I think the translation misinterprets a few things, and I read it. Turns out my hunch was 100% spot on. Lord Timothy Dexter is easily the greatest Western philosopher of all time. I'm convinced this dude was one of the smartest human beings to ever exist, to be honest with you. He is also the only man I will ever willingly call Lord, because he was made Lord by the people of his town. He wasn't made Lord by some foreign king, but by his community. That's a man worthy of the title Lord. They thought him worthy enough to be a proper Lord, so they made him one. In the first paragraph of his text, his anthology, he writes, I'm reading the translation part, I will let you know the secret how you may see the devil. Stand on your head before a looking glass and take a Bible to your bosom. Fast 40 hours and look into the looking glass. There is no devil if you don't see the old fellow, but I affirm you will see that old devil. It's oddly specific, right? Oddly specific instructions for how to remove the veil hiding the demon/daemon/devil that follow most of us around through negative thoughts. Fasting for 40 hours would starve and remove all parasites, all bacteria in your gut. Doesn't have to be parasites. And that bacteria could be the physical anchor of a negative thought entity, like also known as the devil, perhaps. Maybe removing the devil's physical parasite anchor, doesn't have to be parasite, drastically reduces the devil's influence on us. After fasting, standing on your head would rapidly force blood to your brain, which feasibly could increase brain concentration and focus, albeit for only a short amount of time. It just so happens that blood, low viscous blood, which means not sticky, well hydrated blood, is more electromagnetically reactive than ferrofluid. That the mulberry-shaped piezoelectric calcite crystals called the pineal gland can produce electricity when vibrated or pressured, and that it is possible to consciously control the organs around the pineal gland, which includes almost every unconsciously controlled function of the human body, as well as the occipital lobe, which is vision. Also, standing on your head would look like you were standing upright to an entity looking through the opposite side of the mirror. Holding the Bible is like an airport limo driver holding a sign with their passenger's name on it. In other words, you are summoning a devil, but are offering them a drive into this realm, except the vehicle isn't a limo, it's your physical body. We don't have a soul. We are a soul. The body is a vehicle/avatar. The mirror looking glass can let us see things that are outside our time and spatial light perception because of reflective mirror refraction, especially when more than one mirror is used. Listen to the song Drive by Incubus. It's not talking about cars. It's talking about the vehicle known as the human body. Have you ever noticed that celebrities cover all their mirrors? And they take fake mirror pictures as if they're afraid of the mirror. Why are they afraid of the mirror? Why do movies and popular culture often show demons hiding in mirrors? I think Lord Timothy Dexter knows exactly why. Those two sentences, Timothy Dexter explains a more feasible way to legitimately lift the veil of this realm than any book ever. 2 sentences, he drops one of the biggest pearls of truth I've ever come across, and he does it while trolling like a second grader. The poor spelling isn't just a troll, it has many purposes, as I will soon show. Despite what the comedic videos exclaim about Timothy Dexter just stumbling upon his investment ventures because of other aristocrats trying to bankrupt him, the above explains in detail that Lord Tim knew exactly what he was doing. He was one of the largest backers of government securities during the Revolutionary War, and when the U.S. won, he became a multi-billionaire in today's money. In a way, the USA doesn't win the Revolutionary War without the financial backing of Timothy Dexter. The comedic videos mock him because he placed himself on the same level as the Founding Fathers, when he actually was one of the largest funders of the American Revolutionary Army. There are so many Founding Fathers that did nothing even close to what Timothy Dexter did. He put up his entire fortune to back the continental currency. He went all in on America. He also created 40 statues of the Founding Fathers and made a correction on Thomas Jefferson's statue to say that he wrote the Constitution, not the Declaration of Independence. And I think that's actually accurate, that Thomas Jefferson didn't write the Declaration of Independence. That's a lie, I think. I think he actually wrote the Constitution and wasn't really one of the real Founding Fathers. He was kind of a traitor. Same with George Washington. That's why Timothy Dexter calls him Pitt, not George Washington in his Anthology. And if you look up the Articles of Confederation, or right after the Declaration of Independence, there were 14 presidents before George Washington. This is never mentioned in schools. And a handful of them were black. You can see who they were on the $2 bill. You can see the black presidents on the $2 bill. The guy sits in the front row. And that's why I think Timothy Dexter was saying that about George Washington and about Thomas Jefferson actually being the author of the Constitution, not the Declaration of Independence. He knew whalebone fashion was blowing up in France, so he systematically cornered the whalebone market of the entire northeastern United States in 50 days under the noses of New York, Boston, and Salem, increasing his wealth by 75%. He dreamed about warming pans doing well in West Indies for 3 nights in a row. Being a knowing one, he knew that was an obvious sign from the universe. So after the universe gave him a sign, he without hesitation bought 42,000 warming pans, packed them in 9 different ships, and sent them all to different ports in West Indies. He sold them all, increased his wealth by 79%. He bought 21,000 Bibles, put them on a bunch of ships, and sent them to different ports in the West Indies. He sold them all, increased his wealth by 100%. Next, wise words explaining that if you do not have a moral populace, you must consolidate power into a moral king, in my opinion. When you cannot tell if someone is really dumb or really smart, it means they are likely extremely smart. The best military strategists throughout history are the ones where no one could really tell if what strategist was really dumb or really smart. For example, George Patton finished dead last in his graduating class at West Point, used to tell people that he remembered being a Roman general in a past life, was very eccentric, yet is arguably the greatest general in World War II. If you know your opponent is smart, you will plan for a smart enemy. A smart enemy will always make the logical and smart move. This means you can predict their movement and plan accordingly. If you know that your opponent is dumb, you plan for a dumb enemy. A dumb enemy will fall for simple maneuvers. If you don't know whether your opponent is smart or dumb, you cannot plan for them because you have no idea what will work on them. Therefore, always be wary of someone that you cannot tell if they're really dumb or really smart. In my opinion, people appear dumb because they simply do not care about things that normal people care about. They don't bother with the mundane things that people regularly subject themselves to. My general rule is, if you cannot tell if someone is really dumb or really smart, assume they are really smart in subjects you do not even know exist. In the next page of his anthology, Lord Tim explains that the whole cap and gown degrees were just a Freemasonic scam. Ever hear of 33-degree Mason? The key word is degree. What do we get when we graduate college? A degree. Keep in mind, Lord Tim figured this out in the 1780s. In 2022, you'll likely not find 1 in 100,000 humans that can explain the purpose of the cap and gowns used during all college graduation ceremonies. But Lord Timothy Dexter explains it in his anthology. I'll bet he does it in the language of an illiterate second grader, but he still did it. He makes a wise statement about every man having some small amount of devil in them when given power, which is true in my experience. He then laments being unable to properly reach the common folk about the obvious lies he sees propping up. This entire anthology is likely his attempt to awaken the general populace without revealing things outright. Most that have tried to forcefully wake up friends or family will learn that it almost never works. The longest fight in movie history is a metaphor for how ridiculously hard it is to forcefully wake up a friend. The longest fight in history is the fight in They Live, the movie They Live. A pickle for the knowing ones is referring to the pickle, as in like problem, that the knowing ones often find themselves in when trying to help explain things to ones around them. It requires a very high level of compassion, empathy, and finesse. It will be like the scene in They Live. In his anthology, Lord Tim disguises every truth he reveals as just the ramblings of an illiterate buffoon. The purpose for this is so everyone that reads it can advance at their own pace. They may read it when young and think the man a buffoon, but maybe when they are older and wiser, they will see the truth in Lord Tim's supposed ramblings. The poor spelling and punctuation also gives Lord Timothy Dexter a universal karmic laws shield, a liability shield from the incredible influence of the church at the time, as well as a liability shield in the laws of merchants, which governs all law, all judicial systems in the world. In the next few pages, Lord Tim reveals that all wars are caused by broken merchants who operate on debt, deceit, trickery. The broken merchants start wars because they have nothing to lose, and war is the only way for them to regain their wealth. Back then, you couldn't just straight up call all priests devils back in 1780s, because the entirety of the church would use its immense influence on the populace to destroy you, even if you're a billionaire like Lord Timothy Dexter was. This is another example of his absolute brilliance. He doesn't call all priests devils, like he doesn't spell it correctly. He calls them all devil priests, and the spelling is D-E-V-E-L, and then priests, P-R-E-A-S-T-S. The poor spelling protects him from any attacks by the church because it would make it seem like the church was picking on an illiterate buffoon. And then he has a great quote: "When man is so weak he won't do for a lawyer, make a priest of him." My parents raised me Catholic. I went to Catholic school all my life. I used to go to church every Sunday. And not once in my entire life did I think that a priest would be a good person to ask for advice. They always seemed like such weaklings to me, even when I was little. But Timothy Dexter provides a good alternative to a priest, and that would be a friar. Because when you think about it, a friar is actually a lot different than a priest. They're more like hermits. They don't go around preaching, repent your sins by paying us money, which is essentially what mass service is. A friar lives in nature, like hermits would. They would likely be extremely good sources of spiritual advice. Then he goes on to explain an incident where one of his housekeepers was experiencing paranormal activity, and the woman thought it was because she had sinned. So she sent for a priest. The priest came and said a prayer. As a result, the housekeeper stopped experiencing the paranormal activity, but instead she turned into a crazy woman. In other words, because she consented to the priest's help, it opened her heart up for possession by whatever was haunting her house. Meaning exorcism is likely not what people think. This is even the case in the movie The Exorcism. The priest in The Exorcism doesn't actually get rid of the demon. He simply gets it to switch bodies with himself, meaning the priest's heart was more open to demonic possession than the young, naive girl. He's mocking the complete madness that is the Christian Trinity. The next few highlighted sections, Timothy Dexter continues to call out colleges and priests as the complete scams that they are. He laments not being able to stop the honest people from falling for the lies of the priests and falsity of colleges. This is back in 1780, he was calling out college. And then he goes into a section where he actually uses correct spelling and correct grammar with punctuation, meaning showing that he actually can write normally. And he gives his theory of the earth. Dexter surmises that the earth is a massive creature. All organisms within earth are microscopic on earth scale, and all organisms make up the whole of the massive creature we call earth. What human brain cells are to a human, humans are to the earth. He's saying that the universe is infinite on a time and spatial scale. And he suspects that humans have dominion over the creatures of earth. Humans have the most power. Then explains that because humans have the most power, they can be the most helpful creatures in the earth, but can also be the most vile creatures in the earth. This is the 1790s, and he's saying this stuff. 1780s, 1790s. The only source I've ever come across that had a similar view was Cyrus Reed Teed, a man who started a cult in the 1870s after taking the name Koresh, not to be confused with the name of the cult leader of the same name that was murdered along with women and children by the FBI in Waco, Texas. But that's an awfully interesting coincidence. Cyrus wrote a book called The Cellular Cosmogony. Earth is a concave sphere with proof. And the proof is pretty legitimate that the Earth is concave. Not a globe, which would be convex, and not flat. It curves up. He thought that the Earth was a cell of a much larger organism, that we live on the inside of the membrane of the cell, and that the universe was infinite on a time and spatial scale. This is just my current comprehension of the nature of this realm is the same as both of them, but with some tweaks. I think that Dexter explains that there will be an end to the universe, but I don't think there will be an end. I think it is infinitely fractal. Infinitely fractal in time, as in, this is an example, 1 year for a human is like 100,000 years for a blood cell, but only 5 minutes for Earth. Infinitely fractal in space, as in the entire realm we call Earth is a microscopic cell of a much larger organism, which means each of the cells that make up a human are worlds just as relatively large as Earth at that scale. My comprehension matches Cyrus Reed Teed with everything except the shape of the cell. He assumes it's a concave sphere, but I surmise that it's a concave shape that could be the shape of a tree, or a hexagon, or a pentagon, or a sphere, or a octahedral, or a human. Dexter and Teed had the best comprehension of the nature of this realm throughout all of history, in my opinion. Better than the Bible, better than any Western philosopher, better than any Western myth. Now, I'm sure one of the main reasons why Timothy Dexter calls himself the greatest Western philosopher and not just greatest philosopher is because there are Eastern philosophers, Native American philosophers, Mayan, Incan, Aztec, African philosophers, or shaman, or whatever, that also had similar views. Then Timothy Dexter, in his anthology, goes into his personal life, where he rants about his wife being an evil piece of work that got his daughter involved with an Abraham bishop, which I think is a euphemism for Jew, who was a weak devil-controlled man who hit his daughter on a few occasions. His wife would always take the side of the Abraham bishop in order to siphon funds from Timothy because of his soft heart for his daughter. He eventually started referring to his wife as a ghost to people that visited his mansion. His wife would say something, and Dexter would say, "Pay no attention to the ghost." He then spends more time explaining that the Pope and the entire Catholic Church worships death. This might be a hard pill to swallow for some Catholics, but why else would Catholics be so incredibly obsessed with relics of the dead, eating the body of Christ, drinking Christ's blood, wearing all black uniforms with a small white slip around the throat, feast days, the black uniform priests are telling us that they are dark devils in their soul, except for their voice, which is white, because the vocal box is right where they had their little white thing. In other words, they talk about doing good, but are dark devils at heart. Timothy Dexter goes back to the bad spelling after this part, because no one could say these type of things back in the 1780s. And in this way, I think this is how he is one of the smartest philosophers ever, and he's right in his assessment. The guy was a genius, and way, way ahead of his time. So in a way, he kind of was the greatest Western philosopher of all time. And hope you enjoyed the video.